Hello everyone, welcome to the 5 Minutes Podcast. Today I like to talk about the Bowtie method to evaluate risks. And of course, the name Bowtie, it's because it's the shape of a bow tie. So the basic of the Bowtie method is a visual way for you to assess and respond to major hazards in your project environment. So let me start by the center of the bow tie. So the center where the knot is. It's the event. The event is when you lose control over a hazard. Okay, so you have a hazard, something that you are concerned about, and then when you lose control of that hazard, you have the event. Basically, the event is in the center between two sides. On the left one, the threats that originate the event, and on the right side, the consequences. So let me try to give you an example. Most of the examples you will find on the web are events related to security, to accidents. So I try to create an example that is not like that, exactly to open your mind on the uses of the Bowtie method. So let's suppose you have a hazard, and a hazard is your credit card database. So this database contains all the credit card information of all your clients. And the event, the center of the bow tie, is when you lose control of the database. So something happens and you lose control of the database. So basically, you have some triggers or some reasons for you lose control. So let me give you some examples. You may lose control because a failure on the database server. You can lose control because a leak of the password or access credential. You can lose control because of sabotage. And you can lose control because of the lack of knowledge of who is operating the database. So all these threats can make you lose the control of your database. And then on the other side, on the right side of the bow tie, you have the consequence. Okay, what happens if I lose control of the credit card database? So I can have data being hacked. I may have clients being mischarged. I can lose data, transaction data, client data, right? So this is an absolutely very simple example. So imagine this in a visual. So imagine the central post-it with lost control of the credit card database. And then on the left side, you have, I would say, the 4, 5, or 10 threats that could generate that loss. And then on the right side, you have the consequences of this loss. So basically, you have a map of that hazard and that event. So what do you do now? You need to plan the responses. And the concept of the responses using Bowtie method is by using barriers or barricades. So how I can block threats to happen and how I can block consequences to happen. So I can put barriers on the left and on the right side. So let's suppose lack of knowledge generating loss control of the database. So I can put a barrier there. I can put increase training for new employees working with the database. I can put another barrier. I can put in the first 6 months of work, the passcode of the new employees will have to be rechecked and all operations by a more senior staff. So what I'm doing, I'm putting barriers. Each barrier will have a cost, will have an effort to be in place. And then on the consequence side, I can do the same. For example, let's suppose the consequence loss of data. I can put a barrier there saying I will back up the credit card database in another server, in another facility. And by doing that, I will block the loss of data to happen. So basically, what do you do? So you basically create this map with the center based on the event, the left with all the threats, and the right with all the consequences. And then you need to find ways of putting barriers and block that event to happen. And this is the full concept of the Bowtie method. Of course, we do not use this method for every single risk. You should use this method only for relevant risk events. Relevant events that could threaten the life of people, threat the environment, or threat the existence of the organization. So you don't do that with every single risk, because otherwise it will take a lot of effort to do that. But you do that with all the major ones. And it's an excellent group tool. So it's excellent for you to discuss with other people. It's very common and very used. It was created in the oil sector, okay? I learned about that in the oil sector as a chemical engineer. But right now we can use this kind of visual tool in a very simple way for many other risks. Like, for example, this, I tried to create from the top of my mind an example that is not related to an accident or something like that. So this is why I created this on the credit card database. But if you go on the web, you will find so many examples of hazards related, for example, to accident, to explosions. For example, I can use that. I have a storage of an explosive. Then I have a problem. For example, the ignition of that explosive. What could generate that ignition of the explosive? Heat, temperature, sabotage, terrorism, whatever. And what's the consequence of that? Fire, explosion, a major explosion, loss of control, financial damage. Did you get? So you have this on both sides. I didn't want to use this example because this example is on the web and you can find excellent examples of that. There is one example of a loss of control on the car. And it's an excellent way to understand how you can put barriers on that, how you can avoid some consequences of that. So it's a very, very important. For example, let's suppose you have an event that, for example, you have something that could put you on risk on the health side, and then you may trigger, for example, some disease. And then, as a consequence, your family can, for example, suffer with your absence financially. Then you can put a barrier, making an insurance. But this barrier will solve only the problem of your family not having money to survive. It will not resurrect you. So did you get that? So this is why it's so important to use this kind of technique to understand how effective each barrier is to each different risks. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and see you next week with another 5 Minutes podcast.